In the 14th century, a silent killer swept across Europe. It was the plague, a name that struck terror into the hearts of millions. History remembers it as the Black Death. In just a few years, it claimed 25 million lives, a third of the entire continent. The world felt like it was ending. A friend who was healthy in the morning would be gone by nightfall. In this landscape of despair, strange figures began to emerge from the fog. Men with the faces of birds. Imagine your city today. A red cross is painted on a door, a mark that the plague has entered. Once that mark appears, the entire family is sealed inside to wait for death. In the silence of the morning, you hear it. The rhythmic thud-thud of a cane on the cobblestones. How would you feel? Would you see a savior bringing hope, or a grim reaper coming for your soul? Today, we step out of the history books and into the fog. This is the reality of the plague doctor. How did this nightmare begin? It wasn't born in the streets of London or Paris. It arrived as a silent stowaway on merchant ships traveling the Silk Road from the east. When those ships docked in Sicily in 1347, the sailors were already dead or dying, their bodies covered in mysterious black boils. The terror didn't walk into Europe. It sailed in. As the Great Mortality spread, the social fabric of the Middle Ages simply tore apart. Local priests fled, and regular doctors died alongside their patients. Cities were paralyzed by a vacuum of authority. To maintain order amidst the piles of corpses, local governments were forced to create a new, desperate profession, the medico della peste, or the plague doctor. They weren't just medical workers. They were legal witnesses of the apocalypse. They were hired not necessarily to cure, but to count the dying and manage the chaos that no one else dared to touch. Their birth was an act of pure desperation, a sign that the old world had failed, and a new darker order was required to face the darkness. The most striking feature is, of course, the bird-like mask. At the time, doctors believed in the miasma theory, the idea that disease was carried by bad air or foul smells. If you were hired as a plague doctor, your first sensations would be isolation and suffocation. Think of how uncomfortable a modern mask feels after a few hours. For them, it was far worse. The beak was stuffed with over 50 types of dried herbs, rosemary, lavender, cinnamon, creating a constant, overwhelming wall of spice that made every breath a struggle. Their heavy leather robes were coated in wax to repel fluids and fleas. It was hot, stifling, and heavy. But a single inch of exposed skin could mean an agonizing death. Every movement was a gamble. Knowing the risks, would you have the courage to step into a room full of the dying? But who were these men behind the masks? Truth be told, very few were elite physicians. Many were second-rate doctors, desperate young men looking for a name, or even amateurs with no medical training at all. One was even a former shoemaker. They were hired by the city as public servants, but in the shadows, a darker business thrived. Some took bribes from the wealthy, sold fake miracle cures, or even rewrote the wills of the dying to steal their fortunes. They were not saints. They were human. They thought, if I might die tomorrow, why not live in luxury today? Beneath those black robes lay the raw, messy reality of human greed. If you were a patient in the 14th century, the latest treatments would terrify you. Take this dried toad and strap it to your sores overnight to draw out the poison, the doctor might say. Today, we would laugh at the absurdity. But back then, this was the pinnacle of medical science. The most common practice was bloodletting, cutting a vein to release bad blood. In reality, it only drained what little strength the patient had left. They believed in these cures with the same conviction we have in modern medicine today. The true horror isn't just the disease. It's the realization that what you trust most might actually be useless. As doctors, they failed. Their treatments were useless, and many died alongside their patients. But they left behind one thing that changed history: the records. They meticulously noted who died, when, and where. At least let there be a record that this person existed. These grim lists of the dead became the foundation of epidemiology. They taught us how diseases move through a population. Even our modern word for quarantine comes from the Italian quaranta. The 40 days ships and travelers were kept from landing in Venice, so disease would not spread into the city. They couldn't save the patients in front of them, but they saved the future. Their work became the bedrock of modern medicine, but history rarely speaks of the tears they shed or the screams they heard from behind their glass goggles. Look at the mask one more time. Was it a suit of armor to save others? Or was it a wall built to keep the suffering at a distance? Perhaps what they feared most wasn't the plague itself, but the coldness of a world where you had to wear a mask just to touch another human being. If you met this bird-like figure in a dark, foggy alley tonight, would you see the last hand of human kindness? Or would you fear that whatever is behind the mask is no longer human at all? The footsteps of the plague doctor have faded into the darkness of time, but they still echo, quiet and haunting, beneath the surface of our civilization.